The final session before lunch is always one of the most entertaining ones at these sessions. We've been doing it for a number of years, and I've had the honor of being the of moderating this panel. And it's going to be a discussion with some of the leaders in the industry driving these technology initiatives and actual approaches within operators and also in standards bodies as well. So just a note before I start. We've got lots of material to go through with the folks attending here, but we also wouldn't mind hearing any questions that you have. So I'm told that at some point there'll be people walking around with microphones, and I'll lift my head up at some point and see. So we do want to try to get some engagement here if you do have a thought that you want to get discussed. So with me on the panel, to my far left, you might remember from this morning's session, is Axel Clauberg, VP Aggregation Transport at IP at Deutsche Telekom. Then next to Axel, also a great speaker from this morning, is Vickie Lonker, who is VP Network and Security Product Management at Verizon. Next to Vickie is Jehanne Savi, who is Executive Leader All IP and On-Demand Network Programs with Orange. And then finally, just in time, with his microphone, is Don Clarke. He's Chair, Network Operator Council with ETSI, NFV, ISG, and also Principal Architect at CableLabs. So thanks very much for joining. We have a lot of material to go through. As befitting, you started the day, Axel, so I'll start with you if you don't mind. So you sort of wound up your presentation with sort of a punchline around cloud native being the key as we go forward. So in your mind, what does the industry need to focus on in terms of getting to that cloud native environment?
Yeah, good question. So I think when we look back 6 years ago, when we started the whole NFV journey, maybe our industry was a little bit POC infected. So we were focusing on a lot of proof of concepts, but we didn't really make it from the proof of concepts into production in the time we originally expected. So I think as an industry, we really need to work in an agile way, get the first minimal viable products based on cloud native implementations out, gain the operational experience, and build what I was highlighting this morning around it. Focus on the orchestration, focus on the network I/O optimization, focus on the changed security paradigms, and this will take us into operationalization. And unfortunately, I'm seeing similar challenges as the ones we had a couple of years ago. We really need to get our act together as an industry now, or the business we have today will be much smaller moving forward because other players are ready to take the to jump into the vacuum we're leaving behind.
Okay. Don, if I don't mind jumping to you, I mean, I think that some of what's implied there in that comment has to do with the work of the different industry bodies that are trying to enable the environment that Axel is referring to. So if you can talk a little bit about your views on the importance of avoiding fragmentation that can take place within industry, particularly as certain operators want to push forward ahead and create their own thing, and specifically, referencing the ETSI standards and around APIs, et cetera. I mean, just basically, in your view, why are the standards so important to driving this forward?
Well, first of all, I'd agree with everybody that spoke this morning that this is taking far too long, isn't it? But I think there's good reasons for that. I mean, it's inevitable that as we enter a completely new paradigm for networking, a new way to implement networks, then we're finding out a lot of new things that we didn't know before. We didn't know what we didn't know back in 2012, did we, Axel? We said, okay, what we want to do is try and get the operators together, because we knew it was going to be hard. One thing that wasn't a surprise to me was how hard it was going to be. It is hard, but it is a surprise it's taken this long. And just to give you an example of the kind of discussions that the operator group had at the very beginning, was that we needed to share expertise, because it was obvious that many of us had very deep insights into certain areas of the problem space. Others had complementary insights. And for example, Pradeep Sen at Verizon was focused in one area, and when I was in BT back in 2012, we were focused in another area. We thought, well, what if we could bring those two things together? And out of those conversations came this idea that we should collaborate to push the industry forward. And collaborating through converging requirements, first of all. I mean, what are we trying to do with this stuff? And what are the parameters within which we're going to be working? So the collaborative effort at the very beginning was about trying to accelerate by sharing expertise. We didn't set out, actually, believe it or not, to create standards in this space, because this is software. Standards don't apply in software, do they? We're used to de facto standards, aren't we? And we know what those de facto standards are. But actually, as we went through this process, particularly with the work that Orange has done, Verizon particularly has done, and Deutsche Telekom has done, we found out that we needed to work a little bit more deeply in some areas. And we arrived at a situation probably about a year and a half ago where we really did need to start specifying APIs, because they hadn't emerged with the discipline of networking applied. So I think the key message for me is that when you do network disciplines and apply them to software, then you have to have a certain approach to the software design, because you have to take into account resilience and the requirements of carrier grade. So I'm not sure that answers your question, which is about fragmentation, but going through that journey, I would like to see more of the IT and networking expertise being brought together, and that's something I'm concerned to work with my colleagues here to figure out how we do that a bit better. Yeah.
So I mean, it's particularly interesting. We have Deutsche Telekom, we have Verizon and Orange, but when you think about operators that perhaps are operating in smaller countries or have a smaller footprint, the standards are absolutely essential, right? In order to drive what they're doing, and not maybe less so than the larger operators, but absolutely essential for that tier of suppliers.
Well, that's absolutely critical, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, in ETSI and NFV, for example, we have representatives from 37 network operators globally, and we have representation right across the globe, including the Middle East. And you will see a lot of my operator colleagues from some of those countries are represented here at this conference, precisely for you to say, what are the pain points that they need to figure out, and what can they do to avoid those? Right,
okay. Great. Thanks. We might come back to standards in a little bit, but I'll move on for now, because Jehanne, during your presentation, you made some, I think, provocative statements, and I'd like a clarification on a couple of them, if you will. The first is you made reference to fake virtualization, could you go back and explain again what you mean by fake virtualization and why that's presumably a bad thing?
Yeah, sure, because I think it's a pain point for all the CSPs that are going for this type of transformation and implementation of the SDN NFV. Going for this implementation, we had the incentive really to get the agility. And so it was, of course, for the end customer promise, the agility, the flexibility regarding new services, then they can order or update real time in self-service mode, but also the agility promise from our standpoint, let's say internal considerations, that comes directly to the EBITDA, by the way, so it's not small point. Being thanks to this improved time to deliver, improved time to repair, because we have automation everywhere, more or less, and easy integration, then we will have this this nirvana of or this paradise, to be agnostic, of agility. And I call it fake virtualization because obviously we are not there. We are not there. We do not have this agility promise, or very partially. And I quoted 2 examples on the resilience and on the integration side. So we have it partially. We can probably deliver some customer promise that are aligned with that, but we will have real difficulties to make it at scale. And so that's why I call it fake, because we pretend to be virtualized. We pretend to implement virtualization. So it's really the how that is at stake. It's the way we implement it that it's probably not either pure enough in terms of model, or not even standardized enough in terms of interfaces, or not skilled enough in terms of operations for us cloud CSPs. So that's why I call to action, but maybe first call for lucidity.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Know what you're talking about before you act. Right. Yeah. So yeah, I have if you don't mind, if I could ask, and I appreciate if you don't want to answer this fully, but do you think that you're getting from the virtualization that you have done, fake or not, are you getting the ROI that you anticipated? Are you seeing operational improvements on operational efficiency, et cetera?
To be fully transparent, it's a bit difficult to say because we are at the early stage of the implementation. So we have offers for a very specific segment, that is the MNCs, the multinational companies. So on this scope, yes, but then it's a bit early to consider the savings that we may have and to have the real feedback on the savings that we may have with the core function, for example, that we're implementing currently. And I fear that maybe we have some backlash also on this saving forecast, due either to security reasons, and I raised the question of isolation between tenants in the infrastructure, or because, and it's linked of course, because of national security obligations, because they could also ask for splitting the infrastructure and replicating the infrastructure.
Sure.
From their standpoint. So it could be a backlash that is difficult also to forecast today, but...
I think there's also a natural caution too, because most of the major operators obviously are publicly held companies. So the financial markets will have a view on how much cost savings you're going to get and when you're going to get it, and you don't want to be too aggressive in making those type of statements without some confidence that it's going to happen.
No, but
so,
definitely there's a prerequisite, for example, with the isolation, the multi-tenant management as for the infrastructure.
Okay, so Vickie, I just turning to you for a moment. In your presentation this morning, one of the things, I mean, obviously, as Axel pointed out, and we've heard it numerous times, it's important that this SDN and NFV, these efforts, one of the issues is that they should deliver a better operational efficiency and thus make the economics of being an operator better. However, you focused on the top line. You focused on, you know, how the different things that Verizon is doing is hopefully growing your market share, you know, and all that, focusing on customer experience and all that. And you used the term in one of your slides, you know, orchestration to the business need, right? So, and orchestrating to the business need, et cetera. And what was implied in that was a link very much to, you know, artificial intelligence-enabled solutions and automation and all that. what's your view on the state of that aspect of this, the automated side of what we're talking about here?
I think, like we've heard everyone say, we have a long way to go. It's difficult. It's the focus area for us right now that we have our platforms in place and our initial set of integration in place. But that automation is key because we have to gather the intelligence that the network can give us, couple that with the data and intelligence that the functions can provide to us that actually, at the end of the day, give an end-state performance of how the application's actually doing and how the end-user experience is delivered. And that's ultimately what our enterprise and business customers want, to know that the application worked, not necessarily that the network worked and the functions worked, because they have to work together. But that automation is difficult because we don't necessarily have the standards. We are using APIs to try to help us develop some of that automation faster. But we need our teammates in the industry to play together. And if we all have to build it separately, then we won't really have interoperability, and it'll continue to be a difficult challenge because the marketplace will have to respond to everyone's needs uniquely, versus delivering solutions that we can scale but repurpose with our own special DNA that may be necessary to deliver a differentiated total solution to a customer. But there's a long way to go. It's a good time to be a data scientist. It's a good time to be a developer as far as that goes, because you have to be able to take the insight. So I have tons of data, even from my wireless company, I have more data than I probably know what to do with. We have a lot of good ideas of what to do with it, but legal may feel differently, or governments may feel differently, but now we have to figure out how do we take that data and actually make it something that gives insight and actionability to end users, so they can make the necessary decisions to have that flexibility on the resources that they want to consume from all of us.
Yeah, I think working with the different operators and also from the technology side, there is a prevailing view that automation and everything that AI techniques imply is actually essential for managing the networks of the future, because they'll be too complex and there's too much going on and everything like that. But if anyone else wants to comment, Axel, perhaps you, do you think that these techniques, these capabilities from your technology partners are maturing fast enough, or are you sort of happy with the way things are now?
Well, obviously it's a long way to go. I believe Sanjay had it in his presentation. Indeed, the enterprise customers are going for digitalization. And there's way more dynamics in the enterprise market than we saw, let's say, in the 2000s, or also early 2010s. And that's why we have to accelerate this, because the other alternative is that the hyperscale public cloud providers will take the market. And I think we as service providers still have an offer, and we can still bring value to our customers, but definitely we have to act. Now that on one side implies that indeed our vendors are moving forward with solutions, that we within let's say open source organizations or other open organizations are actually using the collaboration we have between us as operators, and also the collaboration between us and vendors in these fora to actually make progress in this industry.
One of the things, Axel, that you referenced in your presentation, but that I heard a couple times this morning, is this idea that in the ideal world, paradise, if you will, we did maybe 5 years ago, the industry thought it would get there sooner than it did, but it would be about the operator expertise residing with the operator, and it was about integrating and managing multiple vendors in any way they want it, because it would all work together via standards and all that. That perhaps being difficult to attain because of lack of skills within operators, and really the sort of single stack view, even if it's virtualized, it's still a single stack, is increases dependency on a vendor or certain set of vendors. And it brings it back to a subject that I know that we've talked about on this specific panel multiple times over the years, is the skills situation and how to alleviate that. And Jehanne, you directly addressed that in your presentation also. I'm not sure who to direct this first to. Maybe Don, you. Is this a solvable problem, or is it something that actually there will be a small finite amount of expertise and that will reside in integration companies or whatever, and that's just the way it's going to be? Or is there something we could be doing better as a society to get these skills?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, well, that's why I asked you the tough.
We addressed we predicted the issue of skills very early on, and we talked about reaching out to academia, and I'm pleased to say that there is progress on that. It takes time to migrate university courses. I mean, they're proven courses, but I had the pleasure a couple of years ago at seeing a young Italian PhD undergrad, a PhD student, talk about his NFV related PhD, right? So we're beginning to see that, and a couple of months ago I was at Colorado University in Boulder, and there's a whole course, postgraduate course there, which is very applied, which is looking at the application of software techniques to networking. So it's really a network-driven course, but for software skills enhancement. When it comes to internal reorganizations of our companies, that's a whole different ballgame. And I'd like to hear actually what some of my colleagues on the panel have done about this, because we did recognize, for example, we're early on, there's this kind of simple thing that my colleague Peter Willis said. Networks people are very slow to get this thing called virtualization, and the software people get it immediately. But actually, the two things are very important to be brought together, because at the end of the day, network disciplines need to apply to software, and the software is the implementation of those network disciplines. So you do need these two competencies, if I put them, brought together. They're not necessarily in the same people, but they need to be in the same teams, and you need to have the right drivers coming from the business side. The business needs to drive the platforms to implement the connectivity products that we want, and the software people need to serve that agenda. So,
yeah, I think we're implementing in just that way. We build Scrum teams to develop products at Verizon, and those teams are much more effective now than when we first started the journey, which we really weren't doing in an agile framework. And they're more effective because we have those core network engineers with that expertise that's very important, because you still have to understand networks, and they're partnered with the development teams who are actually going to write the code. So those engineers are often framing up the user story, and the developers are designing to that user story, and then the product owners are managing to make sure that we're getting that outcome. And one of our teams this summer, we added an intern that we had who was an expert in machine learning, and she brought a whole new perspective to the team that we didn't have before. So I think it's not trying to find those capabilities in any one single human head. It's to put many carbon life forms together that form a greater whole. And we're finding that's helping us develop faster and turn the culture, because people now want to be on the Scrum teams because they get to contribute in a different way.
The Jehanne or Axel, any comments on that further? Or?
Yeah, I agree. It's probably with the combination of the skills that we will solve the issue. But nevertheless, we need a bulk of experts that are these double competencies, and that is very demanding. And I think we miss anyway this bulk of experts. Then for the let's say the general operations, we need more generalist profiles, and this is probably more easy to get. But once again, it's a question of scale. For example, in Orange, we have the estimate that it will need to reskill, so at different level, of course, but an order of magnitude of 50,000 people.
Yeah.
Because it's all the technical stuff, more or less,
Yeah.
except the field intervention, and all the marketing stuff, because they have also to build product differently and to manage the ecosystem also. And part of support functions, and I'm thinking especially of the procurement functions. So you see this 50,000 figure is quite a number.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you know, one of your peers in the global telecom world, you know, talked about reskilling 30-some-odd thousand people or something like that, and that just adds to the cost equation. No, I mean, they think this idea of making this pivot always was going to cost upfront money, right? And I think that the reskilling and upskilling is part of that equation as well, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, but it's part of the investment. We do not think the investment only on the technical and equipment side, but also on the human side.
Yeah.
I mean, for telco to become a software telco, as is needed for us, we need this asset, the human asset, and we bet on it.
Anything more to add, Axel?
Well, I think the important things have all been said. We want to be a cloud provider, and then we have to act as well like one of the hyperscales. And as part of TIP, I have the pleasure of working a lot together with Facebook, for example, to see the different way they are working and exactly what you described, how they put the teams together with different skills, and then they help each other achieving the goal. And that is the way. And we, unfortunately, on the telco side, were more used to a world of silos in the past, and the people just didn't work together, and that led to situations where the software or data center people said, well, the networking folks are too slow, I just build things on top of them, and they don't even notice. And that is something we have to address here, because if we let that happen, the world will be utterly complex, and we'll be unable to manage it.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes or so left. I think we could take a question or two if we have one. There was one right here. There you go. Wait for the microphone if you can.
Hello. Yeah, I have a question. Particularly to Jehanne and maybe also to Vickie or Dawn. This morning I heard a couple of times go back in history, learn from history, and my question is in term with relation to Jehanne's title, the race to on-demand networks. In history, there has been a similar situation when we introduced IN for on-demand services already, and can we learn from that perhaps? Because so to avoid that it takes the same span that it was in early telephony, when the first telephony value-added service was launched more than 120 years ago, a weather report, Operator 25, and this made in until the IN, which was a new core network, like the new 5G core, and it had a killer application, surprisingly, which was charging for 800 numbers. Only a few years after IN, in US, more than 50% of traffic was reverse charged, and that was considered the killer application of value-added services, or SDN. In that respect, my question to Vickie, you launched the first service, okay, that was the weather report, Operator 25, and now you're aiming to launch a second service, more complex services and more. So when will we have the first reverse charged, split charged service of that kind?
I'm trying to think how to answer the question because I don't really know. You know, I think interesting. Voice is still the killer app. You know, if you think about all the tools in your home now, where you're activating things with voice, you know, but we're running our networks differently to support that killer app. I think we are still building networks in a way that delivers new capabilities, but we're not building them the same way we used to build them. So we're having to adjust in that, it would take 10 years to build a product on top of IEN like we did in the voice days. And as a product management organization, our average cycle to deliver products was anywhere from a year to 2 or 3 sometimes, because we had to get every aspect of the product perfect, and we had to have full redundancy, resiliency, because we were a telco, and that should never fail, and that's not the world we really live in, and you can't do that in agile development, and you have to pick what's, I don't want to say good enough, but good enough for now, and continue to iterate on that until you continuously improve. So I'm not sure I answered your question directly, but I think for us it's a iterative process to continue to build solutions on these networks in ways we hadn't envisioned maybe when we first designed those networks. And at Verizon, as we converge our wireless and wireline infrastructure, that becomes even more critical, because 5G and other emerging technologies are going to cause us to treat the networks differently and much more on a consumption basis than we did before, where we had services that were static and locked up, bandwidth locked up for users. Our users aren't asking for that now. They want bandwidth flexibility, but ironically, they want stable pricing. So I haven't quite figured out how we do both of those.
Any other comments? Axel?
Yeah, I think the world around us has changed. So when we say we need to learn from history, that includes a blameless failure culture and other things which make up the modern world, but not necessarily from the business models of the past, because unfortunately the world is not the same anymore. Just looking at my kids, how they communicate, it's a different world than the one I grew up in. And we have to learn again from experience and not repeat the same mistakes, but it's a different world.
Okay, so we might have opportunity for one more question. I see a microphone up there, so that's all I can barely see because of the bright light in my eyes, so I'll leave it to you. There we go.
Thank you to you all. Question is, there has been a recognition of the people's skills needed and all. I want to understand from the operators whether they see a recognition for the change in organizational impact as well as a result of this virtualization and the roles and responsibilities changes. Did you hear my question, or you want me to repeat it?
Yeah. The importance of organizational change in addition to reskilling, upskilling, adding in skills. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, it's not just skills, indeed. It's the way we are working, the empowering the teams. It's the ability to make decisions in the teams, the trust in the teams, and that's what's making up the agile work. Yeah, you don't decide from the management that this is the launch date, but you give control to the Scrum teams, and you have to listen to the team, otherwise you're going to fail. And I think that is especially hard for an operator completely used to working in a waterfall world, but there is no alternative.
It's also to acknowledge in terms of management system that what is important is not only the hard skill and the ability to manage SDN and NFV, but it's also the soft skill and all this agility, ability to work together and to manage small sprints and to act fast, fail fast, and so on. And it's also the influence capability. So it's a three-pillar skill that we need, and acknowledging these 3 pillars at management level, because the influence in the ecosystem or in the open source communities and so on is also a key to make it happen and to crystallize in the good way. And if we talk about organization, I think it was quite well described in the slides in the presentation by Axel this morning. Today, or previously, we had a model with an organization that is responsible for the build of the network, then the run of the network, then the build of the IT, then the run of the IT. And now we should have an organization that is responsible for the build and the run of the infrastructure, And another one, not silos, hopefully, but that is responsible for the build and the run of the applications of the services, should they be from the IT side or from the network side, because at the end of the day, it's a bundle that we sell to the customer. That's the end-to-end service that would embed data analytics and connectivity services and specific software for their specific vertical. So it's this move from a vertical organization to an horizontal organization that is also a huge step for our companies, a huge disruption.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we better wrap it up. I believe lunch is being served, and obviously the exhibitions are available. So thank you very much, panel members. Much appreciated. Great information, great insights as always, and thank you. Bye bye.